No problem. Hello, my name's Isabelle Marcarian. Currently living in Sydney, Australia, um, running a law firm in Surry Hills. And yeah, that's the short and sweet summary.
Yeah, awesome. A bit potentially humble there as well. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your family, sort of your family history and its relationship with Australia. You're obviously an Australian Armenian, and just interested in that narrative.
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, we've all obviously ended up in Sydney, something I'm really grateful for, and a lot of moving parts, I think, had to occur to make that happen. So I think I can remember everything at grandparent level, and I'm not that great at remembering past that. But I have, four grandparents, each from different countries, each born in different countries originally. So on mum's side, we had my grandma, Medzmama Eugenie, and she was originally born in Turkey near Bolis. And mum's side as well, her dad, Pusant, was born in Cyprus. So I've got a Cypriot Armenian grandpa, Turkish Armenian grandma, and they actually met. They actually met in Australia. So they both, my grandpa came here first. He came to Melbourne, very, strong and passionate Armenian. I think he helped found the Armenian church in Melbourne first. They found the site there. And then I'm not sure who it was, but someone told him about um, my grandma's family. And she was in the process of coming here, or I think her older sister was here first, which is actually Garen's grandma. And she essentially found her way to Sydney as well. My grandpa somehow found his way to Sydney. Pretty sure they met in Sydney in Willoughby. I'm pretty sure my mum will get annoyed if I got that wrong, but that's them. So they came here, and then mum was born. They actually went back to Melbourne. So mum was born in Melbourne, and my auntie was born in Melbourne as well. And then all the way on the other side of the world, my dad's side, my grandma was born in India. So her, grandma and great grandma, grandpa, they were living in India. And then my grandpa was actually born in Persia, Iran. And he went to the boys' college in India to go to school. So it was very famous is probably the wrong word, but there was a really, really amazing boys' college, Armenian boys' college in Calcutta in India. Grandpa went there, met my grandma in India, and they found their way to Sydney. So my dad was actually born in Calcutta. They thankfully came to Australia. So I got two sides of the family. One was obviously impacted, their mobility was impacted by the genocide. And obviously the Persian Armenians, Indian Armenians, their mobility wasn't, or their history wasn't really as impacted by the genocide. So that's always interesting for me. And then they came here. They obviously had the, dad was born in Calcutta, but came to Sydney by the time he was one. And then mum and dad went to Willoughby Public School, both of them. So they knew each other from
Right.
then. There are a lot of Armenians in Willoughby Public School. When you look at the old photos, people can usually spot their parents. And there are a lot of them in the same class. So mum and dad knew each other from then, and thankfully somehow ended up together. And that's how me and Natalie came about.
Yeah, no, it's there's so much interesting stuff to touch on there. I think when you start having these conversations, first of all, like I've known, you and your parents for quite some time, and I had no idea just the breadth of history there. And I think the other thing is how Armenians, like I didn't know this for a very long time, but obviously there's a lot of Armenians who weren't directly impacted by the genocide, and it's a really interesting sort of nuance for an issue that sort of captivates the whole Armenian community. So that's a whole other discussion. But
It's super
staying on
interesting.
you,
No,
yeah,
it's
no, look,
okay.
we should. I think obviously it's super relevant, and I think especially now. But I do want to stay on you. So maybe you could tell us a bit about your sort of trajectory through university and then into the work that you're doing now. As you said, you're running a law firm in Surry Hills in Sydney, Australia. So yeah, maybe you could tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So my trajectory, I'm obviously did my law degree. I'm a practicing lawyer now. So sort of everything roughly to get me to here where I am. I always knew I wanted to do law. So obviously some people don't, some people do. I don't know why, I just was very set on the fact that I would probably do a law degree. Um, and, I think there's a certain amount of diligence that was, I always cared about school, and that, again, some people are like that, some people aren't. But we had high school, and I knew I had to get a certain thing because that's the world we live in. We had to get a certain mark. Um, I don't necessarily agree with, sometimes how difficult it is, or the mark, levels that get set to get into law, but it is what it is, and that's where we live, and that's the system we have to abide by. So I knew I had to try very hard to get into law. And so year 12 was obviously, year 7 to 12 is big, but year 12 was big. And then, you know, got, an ATAR to get into law at Macquarie. Actually, interestingly, I was choosing between, at the time, it was UTS and Macquarie. And this is a very early and random place to pause the story. But if you are, if you're thinking about higher education, I don't know, for anyone that's younger, I always thought about what would balance my education out. So going to a private school from 7 to 12, do I want to double down on that? There's certain universities that maybe would, see me mix with the same sorts of people. And what I loved about Macquarie, it was a lot broader, amazing people, all sorts of personalities, cultural backgrounds, religious backgrounds, suburb backgrounds. So that was amazing. Going there, doing a law degree in a way that was very collaborative. I find law is all about collaborating and, working together to get things done a lot of the time. Some people obviously work by themselves, but a lot of the time you're in a team. So anyway, did did law at Macquarie, and again had to try very hard. That's very common, my common theme. You have to try very hard. And yeah, I loved law. Something interesting about law in Australia, I don't know what it's like elsewhere, is you're not specializing in anything when you do a law degree. So when you're doing this law degree, you're just doing a law degree. You're not becoming a criminal lawyer, you're not becoming a family lawyer, you're not becoming a commercial lawyer, you're just getting a law degree. And I think some people do law, they know they want to be lawyers, or they have a very clear idea of what they want to do or what type of law they want to do. And then there's a group of people that they've got no idea, and they're just like, I'll do a law degree. So who knows
Right.
who'll be listening to this, but it's a very broad degree and a very good good base degree regardless. But yeah, we obviously did that. And then, like I said, you're not getting a specialist law degree in anything. You just get one, and then you get sent off into the world, and you are told you have to get a job. So the process here is kind of funny. You've got, in fourth year, you're trying to get clerkships, which is your I don't know, foot in the door of the legal industry. And then you're trying to get grad jobs after year 5, which is sort of your first foray into completely full-time work in the law. So yeah, it's an interesting process, and I think for a lot of students, you're not really sure where you're going to end up. You're going to have the degree, you're probably going to go into law. I think a lot of people don't realize all the different places that they, all the different areas of law that they could practice. But, I can touch on some advice there a bit later. But for my journey,
Yeah.
I ended up being very lucky to get a graduate job in a sort of medium law firm, medium-sized law firm in Sydney. And actually, it's probably worth talking about here. At this particular point in time, when I'd finished my law degree, I didn't know what I was supposed to do with it per se either. When you finish your law degree, you can you have avenues available to you. So you try and get a clerkship, or sorry, a grad job in like a top tier law firm. And what they're going to get you to do is cycle through potentially multiple practice areas in the law firm, essentially rotation, and then you might find your place somewhere. Then you could also try and get a grad job in a more medium-sized law firm. You could try and just fluke a paralegal job or a grad job. You can, and these are all in law firms, so we call it private practice. You could also try and get in-house work, so working for a company but in their legal team. And you can also try and go into government legal work, so like ASIC, ACCC. So there's just so much you could be doing, and I think everyone is really unsure, quite frankly.
Right. I might just step in for a sec. So before you continue, it reminded me of a few things. The first is, I remember we did our year 12, like our high school certificate around the same time. I know you're a bit younger than I am, and I was very sort of proud about my ATAR and my marks, and I felt I was on like this high horse. And I remember you telling me what mark you got, and I was like so stunned that I didn't believe you at first. Like, no way, someone did better than me at school. I thought I was like the most like smartest person on earth, which which was a really funny moment. But in all seriousness, the next part which you're discussing, the selection of the university, in Australia, especially, for those who aren't from Australia, basically, I've found a lot of people look at the university. So you might go to someone and be like, hey, what are you studying? Once you finish school, what did you end up studying? And they're just like, oh, well, I'm actually at Sydney University. And you're like, well, you're not telling me what you're studying at Sydney University. It sort of holds this, thing there. And I had a similar decision to make between UTS and University of Sydney with architecture, and I found that it did actually not have any effect on going through my trajectory. Now, obviously, some people might look at Sydney Uni as more prestigious than UTS, or vice versa, whatever that may be. But it was about selecting sort of what's going to make you the best at your job. And UTS did have a much more sort of comprehensive program at that point in time. So I know a lot of people, are probably going through that decision-making process. So yeah, it sounds like you've had a similar experience to me, where it's basically more important to get the training you need as opposed to go for the optics, etc.
I think so. I think the caveat, like, look, I think point blank, there are many unis, but we know Sydney, we know UNSW, Macquarie, UTS, and there's also UWS, there's Notre Dame, there's a lot. Just black and white, we've got worldwide rankings, etc., etc. There's old school prestige attached to Sydney and to some extent UNSW. I will say there's been a couple of instances where it's not been a deal breaker, me going to Macquarie University, but there have been, comments made that I've had to overcome through hard work and through, the quality of what I'm presenting. Basically overcoming that first preconceived notion, picking one of those alternate unis. But to your point, I agree. You have to do what's best for you. And for example, you knew UTS was maybe a better degree, or was going to make you better at what you were trying to be, which is, great. I similarly thought uni is about obviously learning, but you have to want to learn, and the environment is important. So when I walked into Macquarie Uni, it was warm. It was, sort of somewhere I saw myself. And ultimately that's what, that foundation, that comfort, that, belief that this is where I'm supposed to be is probably what propelled me. I could comfortably work for the next 5 years and, you know, as I said, end up being a good decision because some, you know, we went to schools where maybe it was, you know, had a name, but this balanced it out. And, you know, I think it's about you create your best when your environment is best and when you're comfortable, and going somewhere for the sake of it, if you don't feel comfortable with it, you know, isn't great either. So it's
Yeah.
an interesting comment.
Yeah, definitely. Look, I think that the unis sometimes do ride, they coast on their reputations, which, you know, at times it does detract from the learning. And architecture was definitely one of those cases where the dean, like they got one of the very high level people in the architecture course got caught doing something really terrible in order to get students to come to UCIT instead of UTS. They were basically poaching students in an unethical way, and so the
Wow.
whole, basically the entire staff quit at the same time. And so that year that we were applying, the Sydney Uni um, teaching faculty in architecture was like brand new. They'd like never taught in that faculty before. So that was like an interesting contextual thing.
So
Um,
interesting.
but that, yeah, but that being said, like at the moment, I think there's one more thing to say to that. It's like if you're doing well at uni, um, you can go to other unis if you wanted to as well. Like I found that it's marks based. So even though I did architecture at UTS, I then got accepted into like policy at Melbourne Uni, which is, you know, just as prestigious, if not more than Sydney Uni. And you can feel that environmental difference and that sort of uh, you know, coasting on your laurels type mentality. But yeah, as in it's not it going there wasn't off limits either, down the track. You know, as long as you're sort of doing the right thing. I just thought I'd mention that.
No, it's an
Yeah,
interesting consideration. But yeah, I think whatever it is, like, to if you cut through it all, to me it doesn't matter where you go, what you do, you know, what high school, what uni, what job. It's like it's about giving 150% all the time, and it will sort itself out. It's like if you want to achieve something, if you want to, you know, whether it's be exceptional or if you want to, you know, get to a certain place, you will get there if you put in the same, you know, effort, intensity, energy, and you care enough to do well wherever you are. So whether I was at Sydney, UNSW, UTS, Macquarie, UWS, like I hope or I know that I would have put the same in. And I think same with work, and that's what's important. It doesn't matter per se. You go where you feel comfortable. You go where you know, not comfortable in a bad way, but the environment that you think is going to support you and make you not
right.
just the best academic, but socially best, give you a rounded worldview, etc., because academically or whatnot, if you try a certain amount and you care and you put the effort in, like it will sort itself out, is my view.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's great. I just one more thing on this. I think it's awesome, like that you're able to see all the other layers of life at that age, especially coming out of you know, the types of schools that, like the school I went to, it was very academic focused, and it was like, you know, you need to cash in your marks. That's all that matters, is getting that really high mark, so then you can sort of coast on that and go into the good unis and blah blah blah. So those additional layers of, you know, being social or feeling good in environment, it wasn't really a consideration, and you sort of can end up oppressing yourself in a lot of ways and putting yourself in environments that aren't healthy, to say the least. So that's pretty cool. And yeah, speaking of work, so you finished uni and you have a huge amount of options, and you're not quite sure where to go with your law degree.
Yeah, honestly, I wasn't. And it was now a mix of luck and whatnot. I think I knew a few things. The first is that I wanted to learn. So I wanted to learn proper things. I didn't want to go somewhere amazing. Again, it's the same principle. I didn't want to go to a top tier firm if all I was going to do was like doc review for 2 years, or, you know, sort through things that weren't going to teach me as quick as possible how to be the best lawyer possible. I think I had a sense that if I was in a smaller or medium-sized firm, that I would have to do more, that there would be a bigger breadth of things to work on, that I wouldn't be doing the same repetition in task work, because you know, sole practices, smaller practices, medium practices, they don't have the resources for one person to be doing one thing. You have to kind of be doing multiple things, and they don't have, you know, staggering levels of hierarchy. So if the juniors are there, if they're paying someone to do something, that person has to do something. They can't just be doing document review, for example. And I had that as an idea. And actually, I won't name them because, you know, I haven't asked them, but I had a chat with a friend of ours, mine and Dan's, and she was a lawyer, and she's still an amazing lawyer, and, you know, is a partner of a law firm, and she was such a strong lawyer even 8 years ago, and she helped me. So I would say, you know, at this point, if you're confused, if you're not sure what to do, I looked around me and I looked to trusted people. She happened to be Armenian, those in the community, and said, hey, I'm doing this. I know I'm young. I know I don't get it completely, but if you could speak backwards, like, what am I looking at here? And she even said, the most I learned was when I was working with like one person, like in a tiny firm. And it was like the hardest few years, but I learned so much. And basically the encouragement of, look, and if some people are in-house, that's fine, but the encouragement of, you can always go in-house later, but it's very hard to go from like in-house back into private practice. So if you're going to do law, like, go be a lawyer for a bit. You can always figure out how to
Yep.
not be a lawyer later, or be a lawyer that isn't in a private practice law firm. You can be in corporate law in-house. So she sort of gave me a bit of that. And then it was a little bit of luck as well, speaking to someone my dad actually works with. And I said, I want to work, I don't know if you know what I should be thinking of, but I know I want to work for someone, kind is a bit naive, but I didn't particularly want to get yelled at every day for no reason. I
Yeah.
just want to work for someone fair that's going to teach me a ton. I'm not here to like get like my life ruined. I'm happy to work really hard, but I just want to learn. And I don't know, there was so much I was thinking about, but I'm just going through my problem solving mentality, right? I was like, what am I going to do? And he goes, I know who you have to work for. You need to apply for this place. I've known this guy for a long time, and this is now my old boss, Jeff. He's an amazing lawyer. And, I know him, and you should apply for this firm. And so I applied for a lot, but I also applied for this firm, and it all worked out. Like, I went through the interview process. This was at Brown Wright Steen, where I worked previously, multiple layers of interviews. And I was myself, if I'm being honest, in the interviews. I still remember one of the, I don't know if this is good advice because it might not work, but one of the interviews, they asked, what are your 3 worst qualities? And I swear, I was like, maybe one of my bad qualities is I'm a bit bossy sometimes. And whatever happened, and I still love that partner to this day, Matt, but he thought that was hilarious. So I think he put me through to the next. So it all works out if you're yourself, right?
Well, it's such a good point, because you find what you're putting out. So if you're not being yourself, you'll probably find something that's not right for you. But
Exactly.
just quickly, just very quickly. So there's a really good topic here that I'm very interested to touch on, and it seems like, and we've sort of, this comparison was made all throughout my uni as well. There's a lot of similarities between the professions of architecture and law, like structurally. So obviously it's a big topic area, like potentially endless, and you basically need to be taught the skills to be effective. And the skills taught come to you in the workplace, and not every workplace is going to be able to equip you in the right way for various reasons. In architecture, obviously, let's say architecture is like this big, and the top architecture firms will give you this tiny, tiny sliver to work on day in, day out, which sounds like what you were talking about earlier. And so I had a similar experience. I worked for an architect who was he was just one guy, and we had to do everything. And you learn to touch on all parts of the process, especially the parts that only the executive do in those bigger firms. It might
Yeah.
be, I don't know, approaching clients. It might be signing contracts with clients, like the sort of front-facing stuff that I don't know what it's like in law, but in architecture you just never even get a whiff of because you're so
Yeah.
low in the food chain.
Literally.
So how did you find, and I'll make some comparisons to my experience too. How did you find your teaching went? So now you've just been talking about how you had a great boss / mentors that you approached. What did you do? Were there any instances where you weren't getting what you needed, and sort of what challenges did you overcome to make sure that you were learning constantly and the things that you needed to learn to be an effective lawyer?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think finding the environment is the first right decision. So I was lucky in that I found the environment at Brown Wrightstein. So from a graduate, um, like you said, bigger firms, you're not seeing the client at all. You don't even like hear about them potentially, but got taken into client meetings from day one. Write notes of this meeting, force you to understand, like, do I even know what this meeting is? Do I know what's going on? Do the work that arises from the notes. How do I do the work? Figure out how to do the work. Someone will check it, but like everything until it goes out the door, you're doing. And it was like that. And if it wasn't, I don't know what would have happened because it's hypothetical, but if it wasn't like that, I imagine I would have forced myself to move because I know that in order to get better, you have to be learning. And if you're not learning and if you're not challenged, you're not getting better, you're not excelling. So luckily, I was always getting pushed there and I loved it at my first role. Still love everyone there, learning every day. And it's that getting to work with the seniors in the practice and be client facing, which is why you know you're learning, doing things that you don't know how to do on the semi-regular or every so often even, you're learning. The only reason I moved, and I think it's the only lesson I can give out of this, is that when opportunity came, I took that opportunity. And so the hardest thing I ever had to do was take the opportunity and leave my comfort zone. And if I didn't take that opportunity, it's not like the most catastrophic thing would have happened because I wouldn't know what I was missing. But if I didn't take that opportunity, I wouldn't have started a firm. I wouldn't be 3.5 years past that where I am now with a growing practice. It just would have gone. And you only have a split second. You have to think of, move quickly, but you have to back yourself. So it's like if you put the effort in and you've been learning for 3.5, 4 years, whatever it is, and you've pushed yourself so much, then you also need to know, okay, I have been learning. And then the next tough thing is back yourself, then jump on the opportunity, because you just don't get unlimited opportunities. So the lesson there is probably that there wasn't a moment where I had to make a tough decision because I wasn't learning. It's that I had to make a tough decision because I'd learned so much that now I had to move to the opportunity that was coming.
Right.
That's sort of how I ended up where I am now.
Yeah. No, that's it's a pretty amazing story. I think it talks to a few things. One is basically understanding the minimum learning you need in order to go out on your own to then grow in a different way. That'll be interesting to hear about your experience there. So I knew, I worked I think a bit longer before going out of my own, maybe about 10 to 12 years before I sort of took that push. And I think a lot of it was about being able to back yourself, which I struggled with, I think, because I didn't have very good bosses that I felt cared about my growth, and it always sort of felt like this competition of like they're trying to get the most out of me, with giving as little back to me as possible, and it almost felt like that learning was taken hostage a lot of the times. It was like this carrot on a stick. They're like, well, one day when you're registered, you would have done X, Y, Z, and I'm like, yeah, but when's that? Like, what's the pathway? How long's that going to take? I really felt that. So I think my experience compared to yours is a bit different in the sense that I had to learn what not to do. It was like this sort of negative feedback loop that I used to then elevate, as opposed to, which I'm sure everyone goes through. It's not like a sob story or anything, but I think more often than not, it was learning what not to do, and that had confidence implications. So it was just coming out and then being like, oh, I've just started my own firm. Oh, I actually can do this. I can actually do it better than the people I worked for. And then you start like adjusting your own image of yourself and your own ability within that profession, which I found that quite scary as well at times.
Yeah.
But a very important step, that just that moment, it's like a leap of faith. You're like, yep, I do think that I can do this thing. So yeah,
Yeah.
what does that trigger for you, spark for
Yeah,
you?
I think it's this concept of, well, no one is ever ready. Maybe is there's something about that in there. I think it's also about support. So hearing that, it's like, well, at a minimum, you have to support yourself and you have to believe in yourself. Ideally, there are also others that can help support you. And I'm sure there's a correlation between the number of people supporting you and your inclination to go off, but on your own. And so kudos, to those who do go off on their own with limited support, because it's just structurally harder. I think that there's also the idea of, yeah, making mistakes is a necessary part of learning, or learning by learning what not to do, even in a safe space. That happens, giving your team the space to make mistakes. I made mistakes when I was working, and my boss didn't yell, per se. I don't know everyone else's experience, but it was like, learn from this. You do this once, you don't do it
Mm-hmm.
again, basically. I think the idea, it's interesting commenting on how, length of time it took you to go off on your own, versus me. I think it's just an opportunity thing. It came down to it. I wasn't going to do it if the opportunity didn't come. So sometimes it's just luck, and it doesn't mean more than that. It's just
Right.
how it is, and we don't need to read too much into it. But thought what was funny is my dad actually went off on his own at a very similar age. So he was working sort of similar to you but he was accounting, and
Right.
25, I think it was. He started his own practice 24, even. If he
Yeah.
listens to this, he'll probably get annoyed that I don't know the exact age. But it was 24, 25, and he started his own practice. So there's some cosmic thing in it too. I don't know what it is, but I was 25. It was like my 26th birthday when this opportunity presented itself, and we launched the law firm through the startup. So that's kind of funny. But I think the last thing to say with this, because there was like 5 things I was thinking as you were talking. Opportunity and like having the guts to do something. I found it particularly interesting as a woman, because there were a lot of people when I did leave my old firm, and I won't say who or what or why. And these are people that did care about me, but I found like the women were incredibly supportive, and it was like, wow, like you're getting out, go do this. So proud of you. You can do this. Like there wasn't a question. It was just pure support.
Mm.
Whereas, and, some of the men, the male partners were like, are you sure you want to do this?
Right.
Like you're a bit young to be doing this. There's a bit more to learn. And I'm like, I don't want to make it a male female thing, but sometimes you can't ignore stuff like that, and ignoring that is just
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
bad as, calling it out. And it's like, as a female, sometimes you have to push that 10 times harder to have yourself taken seriously, and then you've got to back yourself. So I found, as part of this process, there's like, I don't know if that's front of mind, but it's certainly like, well,
Right.
I better
Yeah.
be able to do
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Definitely. Look, my mum, when she was running her business, she spoke about that all the time. Of like, she would say things like, "Well, if I had a male partner, or if someone else was there with me, this process might have been a lot smoother." And like feeling that. And the other thing is, moving to Armenia, that layer is so extremely obvious. It's like I won't even tell some of the stories that it's so in your face, this sort of gender difference. Whereas here, like in Australia, there's good and bad people. You probably can find an environment that's like um, you know these sort of gender issues aren't as much of a big deal, or they're just non-existent. Here it's so obtuse, like almost it's so pervasive and obvious, where
Yeah.
I've learned to, like, if my partner's dealing with some sort of situation that's potentially conflict, I'm like, well, I have to be there because they're not going to take her seriously potentially. And yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's quite ugly, but
I
those
think it's
experiences have really made me sort of detect that stuff. Yeah.
I think it's like it's more overt in Armenia, and it's just like
Yeah.
blatant, and it's like it is what it is. And here it's almost gone, but it's still covert, and we're getting there. But there's a moment here where I'm just saying to people, like, you're not imagining it. This stuff it's covert, and it's very subtle. Um, it's not
Right.
anything to get angry about sometimes, but it's just something to say, we see it, I hear you, because and anyone that's in a similar situation will say a similar thing. But it's not to discourage, and it's not something I like to say, well, this is so unfair, so let's talk about it so much, because not the best way to overcome this stuff is by essentially succeeding and not giving up. And if you let that type of thing, whether it's overt or covert, whatever country you're in, whichever form it's
Hmm.
in, get to you such that you don't progress or succeed because of that thing, then it wins. So I hope we're getting, here we're a lot further along, but, it's just to say it's here, but you kind of got to work a little bit harder sometimes, so that, it doesn't matter in the end.
Right. Right. Yeah. I just think it's so important to make sure that we did it a lot in university. Actually, one of our like heads of subject was looking into sort of gender in architecture, and there was these crazy stats where we went and interviewed a very, very prominent um, architecture firm for our project. We had to do some like data collection. It got featured in the architecture festival, so we
Oh,
did do
cool.
pretty well. Yeah. But basically, we went and interviewed them, and we were like, "Hey, could you show us, a graduate salary for a male versus a female?" And as they did it, they sort of realized the issue, like the discrepancy in that moment in the interview, where the females actually earned a certain percentage less. And we were like, "Do you mind if we take this paper for our research?" And they're like, "No, you're not allowed to, take this stuff." And we ended up like basically objectively proving that there were these differences that these law firms, not law firms, sorry, architecture firms put. Um, and it sort of ruffled a lot of feathers, but we were lucky that our sort of head of subject was very supportive of getting this stuff out. And I think that's why we sort of got selected, because it was very topic, like important issue, well, always, but at the time especially. And then there was this crazy stat that like over the age of 60 or something, architects were 95% male. So
Wow.
it's like dependent on the profession and stuff. But that's a whole, yeah, I know we could talk about this for a
So
very long time.
architecture is such a
Yeah.
difficult degree. It's like such a tangent, but like, for example, even the ATAR is high, but it's not necessarily indicative. like, just because, say, law, if because we're talking about both professions, it's so challenging to be an architect too. So I find the data is so interesting generally, to just do your course.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's definitely one of the more, backward professions but just because it's so old, it's not like a slight on architecture, but it's sort of has these structural things that are shifting, but there's still a long way to go. But back to Isabelle. So please tell us you were you're at you had your first graduate gig, and now this opportunity's come, and you're moving into a whole new world.
Oh my goodness. I feel like we're meandering, like gone all
Yeah.
sorts of ways. I'm like, yeah, I'm telling this story. I can't even remember. So I'm telling this story. Yeah, this opportunity comes basically. I'm so we haven't even touched on what type of law yet, but I'm an estate planning lawyer. So basically I deal in everything to do with deceased estates and estate planning. So wills, which is, document for when you pass away, what happens to your assets, powers of attorney, which is, while you're still alive, giving someone authority to deal with your financial health affairs. We deal with after death, so getting probate, dealing with administering someone's estate, this whole area, and everything related to it, private client work, trust, superannuation. I did a lot of tax in my previous jobs. So that's the type of lawyer I was. And I was very lucky to immerse myself in that area for 3.5 years because, as I said, I didn't even think that this area existed. Like, it obviously did, but at uni we weren't learning how to be family lawyers or estate planning lawyers or criminal lawyers. We did one subject of everything, and then you just have to pick. So it was potluck that I was lucky enough to specialize in estate planning and tax, and I love it to this day. It's still what type of law I do. So had this opportunity where there was actually a friend. There was Snapchat involved. There was a friend. He was like, this job would be perfect for you. And it was basically like a head of legal principal role at an estate planning startup. So it was a will writing platform. Again, this is all about to do with opportunity. So for 3.5 years, I was writing wills, and people don't know this, or they might know this, but when a lawyer has to do anything, any piece of work, it is very rare that there's a blank page and they write your piece of work from scratch. It's just very rare. It doesn't happen. If they're creating a contract, if they're creating a shareholders agreement, if they're creating a will, there is a template. And there are templates like in every industry, and there are templates in the legal industry. And so when I would write people's wills, I would have to start with a template. I wasn't writing, this is the last will of, it's all pre-written, and I was putting in variables. So if it was yours, the variables would be your name, maybe your partner's name, any children, and it would be, I appoint as my executor, and then there would be the name. So we'd be running these templates, and we'd be charging, a lot of money. And it's hard because I saw the value. Like, we'd have to meet with the client, we'd give them advice, we'd do the document, we'd draft it up, we'd sign it with them. But it would cost for a couple, for a simple set of estate planning documents, like $2,000. For a complex set of estate planning documents, like $5,000. And that's
Right.
fine because advice is valuable and the documents are valuable. But firstly, everyone can't afford that. Everyone in this country doesn't have disposable income with $2,000 perhaps to spare in a given month. So put that, over here. And then secondly, there was this templatized system that I was working with. So for very simple, circumstances, if you knew you wanted your partner to be your executor and beneficiary, if you had the template, it's not that hard to do that. And so
Right.
I, got connected with this platform, and I saw it, and it's an online will writing platform, right? And this is now 3.5 years ago. And it was basically a place where you would go, you would log in, and you would get asked questions like, who are you? Who's your partner? Who do you want to receive things? And the system would generate your will for you automatically. It was a digital will writing platform. And I saw it and I was just like, this thing it's going to work. Like, I know it works because I do this anyway. This is allowing people to do it. And so I had high belief in the technology straight away. And I was like, I have an opportunity to be part of it, or I have an opportunity to watch it as it takes over our industry. And I knew it would. I don't know why, I just knew it would. And we're seeing that a lot now with AI. Like, a lot of jobs are going to be gone. A lot of things are going to be gone. And this was, a while back before ChatGPT, but we sort of could see the future. And so it was one of those moments where it's like, you either grab it or it's going to go without you. And I just had to work for it. I don't know why. I was very interested in it, and yeah, interviewed for it. It worked out. There's too much of a story here to be able to fit into this. We're already like so far in, and I feel like we've barely touched the surface. But yeah, got the role.
Yeah.
Got the role there, and the wills were just one thing, and what they wanted to do was also start offering other parts of this industry in the same way digitally. So they wanted to offer probate, which is essentially what happens after you pass away. Your will has to go through a process where the court says this checks out, and ancillary services. So soon after I joined, we created a law firm that was linked to the main business. It had to be a separate company because law firms have certain rules associated with them, certain requirements. And I started the law firm and, built it up and started offering the services that we still offer to this day. And yeah, it was honestly very crazy. It all happened within a couple of months. And yeah, I'm still there now. We're doing a lot of different things, but I might stop there because I honestly could talk about my work for a long, long time.
Okay, well, yeah, that's it's super interesting. So maybe you could sort of distill everything you've done over that period into maybe some advice. It could be, for maybe there are people who are looking for opportunities like that, or maybe it's more of which is something I'm shocked that we haven't discussed yet, but more about the administrative side, that's separate from the actual practice of law that you'd obviously have had to have learned during this process. Based on the stresses and the pressure that you felt, obviously, you would have spent many hours and sacrificed lots of things to make sure that you knew you were working your hardest. What sort of advice could you give looking back on your 3.5 years? Maybe what would you have done differently, or what would you definitely never change?
Yeah, interesting. I think the advice is, so I reckon I'm summarizing my current status of advice with like, work very hard, do what's best for you, get the right experience, and then take the opportunity when it comes, right? And then once you've taken the opportunity, this particular opportunity was starting up a law firm. I think I wouldn't change much in the way I set up the law firm. I think the advice is something like a law firm, thousands of people have done it before you, thousands of people will do it after you. It feels scary, but logic dictates there has to be a way to do it. Unless you're literally doing something that no one has ever done before in their whole life, and I don't know if I have advice on that, but if you're doing something that someone has done, then know that someone did it before you. There is a way for you to do it. So if you want to do it enough, you will figure out how to do it. And if you put your mind to it, you can achieve it, right? So take that mentality with you. You have to have confidence. You have to, back yourself. You have to put in the work. It obviously took a long time. There aren't shortcuts to some things. I don't want to be presumptuous. Like, I think a lot of people have comments to make about we're Gen Y. I think we've got Gen Z, and the concept of like that that focus might not be there, or things they want things to be, you know, quicker than they are or easier than they are. To some extent they will be, because this is a generation that can use AI, that has a lot of technology that even we didn't have 5 to 10 years ago. But at the end of the day, you still need to put in a high and huge amount of energy to get the thing done. Stuff isn't just going to happen. So my advice is that, you know, that's how you achieve things. And I wouldn't change that about myself, because I know I tried as hard as I possibly could. I think it's about when you look back and say, did I try as hard as I could? And was there anything else I could have done to make this better? And ideally, you want to say, no, I put everything I could into it. Then, you know, you can put your head on the pillow. And that applies to me every day. It's like you wake up, you run your day, you get to the end of the day, and it's like sometimes you feel a bit, oh, I could have done this, could have done that. But ultimately, did you do everything you could with the time that you had? If it's a yes, then you can sort of rest easy and be proud of yourself for that particular point in time. But for the law firm, I think a ton of administrative stuff, ton of effort. I wouldn't have changed anything. My advice, and the reason I'm still, I think, in the business that I am, and I still love it, is that don't be complacent. I was never complacent. It was never like, I've done this law firm thing now, cool. Like, I'm delivering this probate thing, awesome. It was like, okay, well, I've done this, but what about this other product that this company is doing? Is it good enough? And if it's not good enough, why? And what can I do to make it better? And what about these contracts that we've got with these partners? Like, why are they like this? Can we make it better? Yes, then do it. Like, no one else is going to do it for you. So that complacency is another piece of advice. Like, don't be complacent. If you want to be achieving certain things, you've got to keep pushing. This is really random advice. The only thing I wish I did differently out of the whole, well, maybe a couple, they're really technical points. One is,
Right.
I wish I put more importance on data from the first day of work. This is a really like technical point and not a philosophical point at all, but data is everything in this world. Like, if you were running your own business, and you are, Dre, I'm sure you want to know, how long does this take? How much of my time am I spending on X service versus Y service? How much does it cost me to deliver this? What are my unit economics? How am I tracking it? Like, all of that stuff. The beginning is the easiest time to put those structures in place, those data records in place. I was so busy just delivering the service and running the stuff that now, 3.5 years later, it's so much harder to go back and, like, at each iteration, try and figure out, well, how many of these have I done? What proportion are complex? What proportion are simple? What states are my clients in? What is the service split of like post-death and pre-death work, and what document, like all of that stuff. I think I can try and make it broad as a lesson. I guess it's doing it is one thing, but when you're right at the start of your journey, think forward 5 years and be like, what information would I love to have had in 5 years, and what systems should I be setting up now?
Right.
Automation as well. It's like, what systems would benefit me today that I can implement, rather than just doing the task. You know, we're kind of in a mid-generation between like manual and automated. Yeah, thinking like that probably is my biggest regret, that I didn't do that as like someone leading the business 3.5 years ago.
Yeah. No, it's first, just to your point of the, you know, maxing out, like making sure you feel that you've done everything you can with your time. I think that's very good life. Like, it applies to everything. I feel it's one of those things that is probably the most important. Like, I reckon there was some study that I was reading about, you know, people on their deathbed, and it always comes back to, you know, regretting having not done something. It was never, very rarely regretting having done something and either learnt from whatever. So I think that's a really really good piece of advice, not just for lawyers but for everyone. And I personally think like that too, which is awesome. Um, and yeah, to the business side, the data stuff. I think in architecture it's good because our projects are slow and they take a long time. And you could be on a project for 5 years that you thought was going to take 1 year. So the data collection, the lessons learned side of things, it can happen very, very gradually. You don't like get stuck because you have this crazy influx of data coming in at you left, right, and center. So I can't relate too much. But that being said, I had a lot of bosses who didn't believe in lessons learned or reviews or creating a feedback loop for your business with your own data. And it's very clearly one of the most important things you could possibly be doing. So it's interesting to hear you talk about that from that
Yeah.
perspective. Uh,
From
yeah,
Oh, that's right. I was going to interrupt. Like, I'm thinking from a scalability perspective, because it won't apply to everyone, but I'm in a startup, right? I'm in a tech startup. So for anyone that's listening that's more interested in the fact that, I work in tech, scalability is everything in tech. Doing a
right,
process is fine, but doing a process in a way that's scalable is what makes a tech company a tech company. So I guess in the context of all of that, data and this and that, the reason why it's important is, if I'm summarizing it, make sure the process that you've created, which, is manual, perhaps in the first instance. Success in tech and scalability involves you understanding how to turn that manual process um, and break it down into however many steps there are. And for each step, turn it into a step that could be done 1,000 times in a week without breaking your system. And if you think, well, how would I do this step times 1,000? I'm not going to hire 1,000 people. That's when you start to think about scalability. And so if I applied that logic back in the day, it would have been like, oh, well, when I take a client phone call, for example, for the first time, and I put their details into one place, then I should have systems that mimic that data across multiple places, so that, for example, I'm not typing the same thing in 5 times. So
right,
it's only applicable probably to scalable businesses. Not as applicable, as you said, like in your context, architecture is not moving that quickly per se, and there will be some businesses that are like that forever. But I think increasingly we're moving to scalable businesses and tech companies, and
right.
with everything that's happening, and so it probably applies the most there.
I'd be interested to. So just one more quick thing. Have you have you sort of made the consideration of um, how valuable you are to those processes and to the business itself? Because there's there's one point that I noticed in a lot of architects is they basically they rust themselves onto the business, where if they're not there, everything collapses. And the reason that is because you know uh, everything's like your insurance, your name, everything's like on your person. It's not like, which might be similar for law. I'm not sure, but you're not like deferring to a separate entity. It's like if I'm Andre Varda Bogosian and something happens to a building, I can't like get my company to take the blame. It comes directly to me personally. So there's this degree of like control. It's like, well, it's a legal issue as well. It's like, well, I control absolutely everything in this business because I have to. Do you have any of those sorts of considerations, especially when you're considering, automation and all these other things?
It's interesting. Yeah, we have licensing as well. Like, as principal of the law firm, I'm responsible for the advice. Um, Although the law firms are, I didn't realize that in architecture that your company couldn't take responsibility, because in our industry the firm is liable, and then we've got industry insurance. So like law cover protects the legal industry. It's, you pay a lot of money, but um, that's sort of the point. I guess in terms of
Mm,
what I'm prepared to take hands off, when we're talking in the context of tech, the idea is that AI and automation, um, you would train that based off of people. but eventually if it could do it itself, and this is a whole nother area of law, but if it's the AI doing it, then it's who's liable, right? It's not me, I wasn't doing
Right.
it. So
Yep.
there's a world where there's the training of the tech and the training of the AI and the scalability. In terms of anything that actually goes out through the law firm that I did as a human, then yeah, I do care a lot, a lot about the processes, but you can't do everything. You can't grow as a business if you have to sign off on everything. I really struggled with this in the last 2 years because I would see every single piece of work to leave my law firm, every single piece of work, every single email, every single, document. And it was actually reminded me, I don't know if you ever saw this like a year ago or 2 years ago when Gladys was premier, like the worst thing they could say in the media. Someone from her office was like, she's such a control freak. She has to see every single press release if it goes out. If it's got a typo in it, she checks the typos. And I just remember reading that being like, bloody good on her. Like, you shouldn't be having typos in your press release. Like, but they made it out to be so bad. Like, anyway, but it just made me love her even more. But when I did that in the firm, I just laughed at myself a bit. I was like, well, but that's not scalable and that's not sustainable, and that also doesn't teach your team to learn because you've got the oversight's too strong. They
Yep.
don't have space to make
Yep.
mistakes. So over time I've had to say, okay, well, other seniors can check work, and you trust them and you've trained them, or they've got the requisite experience, because this whole system doesn't work if and the firm doesn't grow if only one person can check everything. But
Yeah.
that's all subject to the fact that I think our regulations are a little bit different to yours. Like, the firm's responsible. We've got insurance. You know, I'm not sure about
Yeah.
architecture.
Yeah. 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 No, I think it's such an important thing to be, how you're talking about having the data collection structure in place at the beginning. I learnt that, and it's obviously to do very much with scalability. I learned from, another thing I learned not to do from my bosses was to make myself so embedded into the business, which I think you want to as well when you're young. You're like, oh yeah, like I'm this cool person, professional, doing all this stuff. Look at me. Like there's this sort of ego, sort of driven aspect of that. But if you're actually smart and you're looking at business as a, not only, like, obviously we provide services. It's slightly different to selling fruit at a fruit shop. Like you still are looking to be financially viable and making money. So, and I think that scaling is that, how does a one person architecture show turn into a global conglomerate operating on every continent?
Yeah,
But yeah, I think a key difference there is architects, and it's a law thing. Maybe you could
I should
help
know, but
one
I
day.
don't.
Yeah. Basically, it's just like the law hasn't caught up to the reality of architectural practice, and architects have this insane amount of liability where you're you're not necessarily trained to be that good, or you don't get the industry experience to be that good. But as soon as a case goes to court, not only is it you're like directly in tort, it's like your duty of care. It's not even necessarily to do with the contract or the actual project. The precedents have shown that architects just always take almost all of the blame. So that's a whole other discussion. But I'm glad that you guys can sort of not have that same level of liability, which obviously you are very liable, but it's just not tied to your person. It's just forced me to be a bit more creative with other parts of my life to make sure that I'm not at risk of losing
Yeah,
everything if someone trips
figure
over
it
at
out.
one of my childcares. Yeah. So, um, yeah. Well, Isabel, we've been talking for a very long time, so we might just call it there. Yeah. Thanks so much for your candor and your advice, and talking us through an incredible journey that you've been on and are still on, and obviously looking forward to seeing your future and what you're going to achieve moving forward. It's very exciting. And yeah, once again, thanks for putting your time aside to have this conversation. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you. All good. I feel like we've just had like a bit of just a coffee chat, and I'm like, where did we get to? Have I given these people the advice that I think I should have given them? Maybe not. But but thank you for taking the time as well.